guest, Rifat Audeh, who is a mechanical engineer turned filmmaker, which is a very crazy title. So I'm sure you all are excited to hear a little bit more about that. Fun fact, it's actually like 4 a.m. for Rifat right now. So send love in the chat for, him going out of his way to be here with us. He was part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in 2010, which was a flotilla that tried to break the siege on Gaza. And through this attempt at breaking the siege on Gaza, 10 people were murdered by the Israeli military. And he made a documentary about it called The Truth Lost at Sea, which is what we'll be discussing today. So we're going to start by watching the trailer. Rafat is going to talk to us about the documentary a bit, and you'll all have a chance to ask questions. So if any questions come up while Rafat is speaking, please just leave them in the chat. I'll make sure that I take a note of it and we'll ask it later. And then, if you all have more questions, you'll have an opportunity to ask them later. So we're going to start by watching the trailer, like I said, and we're sharing all the info you need to watch the documentary. If you weren't able to ahead of this call, which is totally fine, you don't necessarily need to be here today, but the link for that is in the chat if you're interested in doing that after, which I highly recommend. But yeah, let's get into it. We have a lot to discuss. So let's start with the trailer. Just share my screen. All right. And if you guys can't hear it for any reason, let me know, please.
They have drones.
We can visually see one significantly large Israeli warship, and there are three altogether on radar.
Stop threatening us.
This cannot go into the 21st century. We cannot have such situation of an open-air prison in Gaza. 1.5 million people not having water to drink, not having basic things, not having houses to live in.
I think that we're ready at any cost, as I mentioned, to prevent this provocation.
We don't really know what the Israelis are going to do. They've made very serious threats. They've said this convoy will not get through under any circumstances.
This has led the organizers to issue life jackets to all the passengers on board.
Israel as an occupying force does not have any right to stop us or to board us.
We see no reason not to carry straight on with it. It does seem to me that Israel's behaving more and more like a psychotic patient.
Hopefully Israel will rethink the madness and behave like a civilized and law-abiding nation.
They're just coming closer and closer.
The Israelis have learned that they can do pretty much whatever they want at no real cost.
Stop cutting the satellite. Let the world know what is happening.
All right. I mean, what a powerful trailer. This is like, a people's effort to break the siege on Gaza. So I want everybody to really think about how powerful that is. And to maybe while we listen to Rafat speak, think about how you can do something as powerful, or really how you can show up, as your role wherever you are in your community for Palestine, because we all can. So I'm going to pass it to Rafat to share a little bit with us. Go ahead, Rafat.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me okay. And firstly, I want to thank CODEPINK for organizing this event, and I want to thank all of you for, attending this event. And I'm not going to speak too long. Don't worry about that. I'm not going to bore you with me dragging on and on with things, but I will say a few points and introduce myself, say a few points, and then I guess we'll open up the floor for any questions and an interactive discussion. So about myself, like Noor said, my background is a mechanical engineer, and I've turned into a filmmaker at quite a later stage in my life, let's say. But I've always been interested in the media, and I've been a longtime activist, and I think that my first interest in activism arose when I was about 10 years old, activism and the media. And the reason for this is because I was living in Canada I was born and raised in Canada, so I was living there for the first 10 years of my life. And when I was 10 years old, I moved to Jordan. And because of my family and my background, I'm of Palestinian origin. My household was always very aware of what's going on in the world politically, particularly in Palestine. So I got that from my parents. And when I was in Canada, uh, because of this politically aware household, my parents, would take me out to protest and so on and so forth. And I would hear them talk about what's happening in Palestine and in Lebanon at that time. There was an Israeli invasion in Lebanon in 1982, and I was following that quite a bit from Canada. And so I gained this knowledge of what's going on in the world from my parents, essentially. But I did not see much of what's going on in the other parts of the world in mainstream media when I was living in Canada as a child. Then what happened when I moved to Jordan at the age of 10 years, I noticed that the issues that were taking place in Palestine were always in the news, always in the media. And that's when a light bulb went on in my head. I started saying, well, how come I never used to see all of this in Canada when I was living there? And that was the first time that I realized that there's this huge discrepancy in media coverage in the West versus what's going on in the Middle East. So that was the first time that I realized that media plays a big part in shaping people's minds and opinions about things. So when I got older, naturally, I guess, I became an activist, and my activism started to gravitate more and more towards being a media activist. So I was living in Michigan for a while. At the time, I helped found a media watch group to address bias in the media. What we would do at the time is mostly write letters to the editor, contact newspapers, radio stations, etc., and try and set the record straight and say, look, you guys aren't covering this properly, and so on and so forth. And after that, I started writing more and more. I was published in quite a few media outlets and websites worldwide, including Al Jazeera, The Independent, Mayadeen, Middle East Monitor, the New Zealand Herald, etc. And in addition to that, my interest in media and journalism led me to undertake a master's degree in 2015 in the UK, a master's degree in media and journalism. And then finally, the crown achievement, I guess you could say, was making a film, a documentary film. And like Noor said, the documentary is about the Freedom Flotilla that took place in 2010, in which we tried to break the siege of Gaza. And it's about a 57-minute long documentary. I know some people here saw it, others maybe did not, but I hope everybody will get a chance to see it. It's called The Truth Lost at Sea, as Noor said. And what happened is the situation in Gaza was dire, as you all know, even from before 2010. So in 2010, there was an attempt to break the blockade on Gaza by sea. Now, there were one or two attempts that were successful in breaking the blockade on Gaza by sea prior to 2010, but in 2010, that was the biggest attempt. because it involved, basically activists from dozens of countries. There were hundreds of us attempting to reach Gaza at the time. And as some of you know, we were intercepted in international waters and attacked by the Israeli Navy at night, right about at this time, actually. They attacked us at 4:30 a.m. Once 4:14 a.m. my time. So it was 4:30 a.m. in the Mediterranean at the time, south of Cyprus, when they attacked us. And they killed 10 of the activists who were aboard the ship. 9 of them died immediately, and the 4th, or the 10th rather, he died after 4 years in a coma. So I was filming as we were on the ship, and many others were. And prior to the attack, what I wanted to do essentially was document our journey. And naively I thought that we would end up in Gaza. I thought that would be the culmination of the footage or the end of the documentary. Of course, after they attacked us, the documentary or the idea behind it took a very different turn. And then I became obsessed with wanting to show the world what really happened and counter the Israeli propaganda in media platforms worldwide. And so the journey of making a documentary for the first time in my life began, and that was a long, arduous process. And there were a lot of challenges making that documentary, and I can talk about those a little bit later as we speak. So that's my background in a nutshell. For me, it was important to make this documentary. Somebody had recently asked me, and I even wrote down the question. They said, why was it important for you to make this documentary as opposed to giving the footage to a documentary crew, for example? Somebody had asked me that not too long ago. And for me, it was important for me to make it. And to be honest, it never crossed my mind to give the footage to somebody else to make, for a number of reasons. First of all, there was no footage to begin with. What happened is that even though I and many other people were filming aboard the ship, once the Israeli Navy took control of the ship, what they tried to do is confiscate all of our footage. And that's what they did for the most part. So what I had to do is try to compile any surviving footage that remained from the journey and from the attack itself. And that was a long process where I had to travel to Turkey, get any footage I could get my hands on from the main organizers of the flotilla at the time, in addition to contacting other entities which had already made documentaries about the flotilla, getting their permission to use their footage, and so on and so forth. In addition to getting permission from certain people who were aboard our ship who were able to smuggle out the footage that they had with them. And that was at a great risk to them. So this film is theirs as much as it is mine. If it weren't for their heroic efforts, I wouldn't have been able to make my documentary. So that's the first point. But more importantly, even after compiling all of that footage, I wouldn't have given it to somebody else to make a documentary, because if anybody else made the documentary, they wouldn't have had that firsthand experience from aboard the ship and aboard during the attack. And they wouldn't be able to reflect accurately everything that took place with us. So for me, in my mind, it was always important for me to make that film. And then finally, and maybe this is the most important reason about why I thought I should make the film, is I've been familiar with Israeli propaganda for a long time now. Their propaganda has spanned decades. It hasn't been for a year or two or a few years or so. The propaganda that Israel practices has been ongoing for decades. And I learned more and more about this because my master's thesis was about propaganda itself. And actually, the title of my thesis or my master's dissertation was revolving around the attack on the flotilla itself. The title was, How Has Israel Justified Its Blockade of Gaza and Attack on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla? A Case of Israeli Propaganda. So the topic of the film is essentially the topic of my master's degree, my master's thesis. So I knew a thing or two about it, and that's why I thought it was important for me to make this film. So that's the background behind the film. Now, I think maybe I spoke a little more than I should have, and I'd like to open the floor for questions. And hopefully, as questions are being posed, I could provide anybody with any more information that they require. I'll hand it back to Noor.
Thank you so much, Rafat. Yeah, not too long at all. Like everything was great. But we do have questions already. So the first one is from Sarah, and she was asking, how can we share the film more? And she said she managed to post it on Twitter, but with zero response. And then she also asked, is there a current Freedom Flotilla, and how can we support it?
Okay, so in regards to the Freedom Flotilla currently, we actually tried to sail again this year. There was an attempt to go to Gaza again this year during the war, or rather during the genocide, I should say, that's taking place in Gaza. The attempt was in April, and unfortunately, roadblocks were thrown in our way. We were trying to sail from Turkey again this time. The ships were there, the donations were there, the humanitarian goods were there, we were ready to sail. But we were facing problems, not only by the Turkish authorities, but also by the country that had granted a flag to one or two of the main ships that we had with us that we were going to sail on. In the last minute, they withdrew their flag, and what happened behind the scenes is, again, these countries were subject to pressure by Israel and the US, and they withdrew their flag. And according to maritime law and rules, ships cannot depart from their ports or from their docks unless they have a flag to sail under. So we were not able to sail. That's in regards to the point about current efforts for a flotilla. There was a ship this year, some of you know about it, called the Hamdallah, which was going through ports in Europe in order to raise awareness also about what's happening in Gaza. And, we are going to keep on trying to break the blockade again. Hopefully it will be lifted soon. There are talks right now, as everybody knows, about a ceasefire. Hopefully it will end this war, and hopefully it will lift the blockade as well. Nobody knows, well, nobody in the public, let's say, knows exactly what the details of this ceasefire are as of yet, but they're saying that a deal is near. Now, in regards to the film, you could see it. Thank you very much for bringing that up. You could see it at my website for free. It's truthlostat.com. And if you go there, you will see that it's written that if you want to see the film for free, please click here, something to that effect. And then you just click on it. It will take you to the YouTube channel where the film is available for free. The YouTube channel is the channel of my distributor. So maybe we could put both up in the chat, Noor, if that's not too much of a problem. Yep, I see it there from Farida. Thank you. So you could see the film there, and please feel free to promote it however you'd like. I made it freely available in April, actually, while I was in Turkey, in order to promote the efforts of this current flotilla in which we were trying to sail on. And so it seems to have got stuck now at about 8,000 to 9,000 views. So if you guys can promote it, I'd very much appreciate that.
Yeah, and honestly, like I feel like when you share things with your friends, share it on your own social media, when we all just share it within our own circles, that's going to be where we're most effective. Okay, my cat Kingu came to say hi. Okay, the next question was how was the idea of the flotilla project initiated and like who planned that?
Yeah, the flotilla, as I mentioned, there were one or two attempts, maybe three in total. I'm not sure of the exact number. Prior to 2010, there were attempts in which the blockade on Gaza was broken by sea. And in this regard, I wanted to mention something because it's important, and a lot of people don't know this history, which precedes the flotilla itself. A lot of people think that the blockade on Gaza or the siege of Gaza began in 2007 after Hamas won the elections in Gaza Strip. And that's true, but it's only partially true. And what I mean by this is that after Hamas won the elections in 2007 in Gaza, a full blockade was imposed on the Gaza Strip because the people there and throughout Palestine voted the wrong way. Let's say, because they didn't vote the way that the US and Israel wanted them to vote. So they're allowed democracy as long as they vote in the way that certain powers want them to vote. So what happened is after Hamas gained power in 2007, a full blockade was imposed on Gaza. But before that, there was a partial blockade on Gaza ever since 1967. When the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip began in 1967, there was a blockade imposed on the Gaza Strip by sea. So since 1967 till this day, pretty much, Gaza has been blockaded by sea. Nobody was allowed to go in or out of Gaza through the sea. This hindering of freedom of movement, freedom of trade, to and from Gaza began in 1967. And then in 2007, 40 years later, the blockade was completed by imposing it not only by sea, but also by land and by air, by all means. And so Gaza was essentially totally blocked off from the rest of the world. So that's in regards to the history behind the blockade. Now, in regards to the flotilla and breaking the blockade by sea, as I had mentioned, before 2010, there were a few attempts to break the blockade by sea, and two or three of them were successful. And it began with just essentially a handful of activists who had formed the Free Gaza movement prior to the Freedom Flotilla coalition. And the first attempt was with one small boat, actually, that broke the blockade in 2008. So the first time in 40 plus years, that was the first time in 40 plus years where anybody was able to reach Gaza by sea. And then one or two other attempts followed that with one or two other small boats. And then came the idea of the Freedom Flotilla as a big coalition. And in 2010, there were other groups that joined the essential or the core group of activists who began their attempts in 2008. And it was a big coalition with organizations in Sweden, in Turkey, in the US, in Canada as well. Canada Boat to Gaza. I need to give them a shout out and so on. So there were a lot of organizations working on this to break the siege. And this is how it came about. And that's why in 2010, we had the biggest attempt to break it by sea. The Mavi Marmara ship itself, which I was on, carried approximately 550 to 600 passengers, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the biggest ship. And we had about 5 other vessels with us of varying size. Some of them were about 40 to 50 passengers. Others were just cargo ships, which constituted basically the crew for loading and unloading the cargo ship. So that was, in a nutshell, what had happened prior to 2010 and up till 2010.
Thank you, Rafat, for that context. And I think this question kind of was answered a little bit by what you just said, but somebody was asking, like they want to hear more about why people would risk their lives to bring necessities to Gaza in 2010, and like kind of what motivated you to undertake that courageous act, which I feel like a lot of it was contextualized by that like, period of blockade. But if you want to add anything.
Well, I think it's the first thing what came to my mind when you said why would anybody risk their life? My first thought was why not? Why wouldn't anybody risk their life to help people in need? If we don't, who will? It's up to us. It's up to the people of the world, the citizens of the world. If every single person in the world said, well, why should I risk my life to do it? Why should I risk my life to do it? And you go around everybody on the planet, then who's going to do it? Somebody has to do it. It has to be us to step up. So I don't know, it's just natural for me to try and help others who need help. And, before we launched the flotilla, there was, as I said, this propaganda campaign against us before, during, and after. And before we launched the flotilla, when we were in Turkey, the head of the lead organization, the IHH organization, which had owned the Mavi Marmara ship at the time, he said something very profound before we went to the port and embarked on the ship. He said, if this was taking place against any people in the world, including the Jewish people in Israel, we'd be doing the exact same thing. And injustice to one person is an injustice to everyone. So it's natural to stand up for what's right. And that's why we did it. And so I don't know, I think that there was a second portion to that question, if I'm not mistaken, or I'm not sure, but I hope I answered the question in its entirety.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like now, even especially when we see like the US government has failed like so horrendously to impose an arms embargo on Israel. And we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end, that now people are taking it into their own hands. Like when governments across the world are failing to actually stop this genocide, it takes people to step in and, do what needs to be done because nobody else is doing it. So we can't always just like look around and hope that somebody else is going to do it. So, um, thank you for that. And the next question, somebody asked, are you seeing any change in Western reporting, or have they gone into overdrive to lie further? Since the Western media will likely not report fairly, sorry, and censorship is being increased, what is your advice on how to get the truth out?
That, that's a tough question, actually. Well, mainstream media is going to remain mainstream media. I mean, the good thing is that today, in this day and age, things have changed in the sense that you don't only have to rely on mainstream media to find out what's really happening. Everybody has the internet at their fingertips, and anybody who really wants to find out the truth can do so if they do enough research and so on. But it's changing in the sense that the mainstream media outlets, cannot ignore this or pretend that it does not exist anymore. I mean, unfortunately, it's come at a huge price, a tragic price, the lives of the people in Gaza primarily. But mainstream media can't ignore this anymore. They can't pretend this does not exist anymore. They're being called out in social media and on the internet by, legions of people everywhere throughout the world. So they can't ignore it anymore. How to get the truth out even more? I encourage people to keep doing what they're doing via social media, via their networks, via their circles, the people that they know at work, at home, in their communities. The tide has changed after this genocide. The tide has changed in a way that we never thought even was possible before. So the truth is out there now. They cannot deny it. They cannot escape it. And I encourage people to just keep doing what they're doing. Keep raising awareness, reaching out to others, similar to the work that Code Pink is doing, actually. I see Code Pink, day in and day out, going to the offices of Congress here and there. I saw that few videos about Trader Joe's, and, just keep doing what you're doing. And the more we do that, the more the truth will get out there, the more awareness will be out there, and the more change will take place.
Yeah. I totally agree. And there was a question that a few people had, and it was, is there a way to watch the movie not on YouTube? Because some folks don't have like a YouTube account, and they need to verify their age in order to watch it. And then just like other issues people were having with YouTube.
Yeah, it's strange to me. Some people said that they weren't able to watch it on YouTube, but if you go through that simple process of verifying the age, you should be able to watch it for free. The thing is, I want people to watch it for free. There is another way to watch it, but that's through my distributor's channel. But you have to pay like basically the amount of a cup of coffee if you want to watch it there. So it's like $3 or $4, something like that, to watch it on the Journeyman Pictures website. Or you could also, if you have an Amazon account, even though now I'm boycotting Amazon as well, but if you have an Amazon Prime account, you could watch it there. You could watch it through Google Play as well. So there are numerous ways to watch it. If you go through truthlostat.com, you should be able to get both options of either watching it through one of these channels via the distributor's channel or through the YouTube channel itself.
Thank you. And yeah, if you aren't able to watch it on your own YouTube channel, I'm sure like somebody else close to you probably has a YouTube channel they'll let you watch it off of. It's just like an hour long. So yeah.
But by the way, you don't need a YouTube channel for yourself to watch it. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have a YouTube channel, and I was able to access it. It just wanted to make sure that I'm over 18 years of age, because some of the scenes in the film, for the people who haven't seen it, some of the scenes are a little difficult for children, let's say. So I think that's the only reason why YouTube is asking for an age limit when watching the movie.
And then I actually have a question. So
Sure.
I was wondering if there was any retaliation that you feared because of like this film. I mean, I don't really know how much fear you can have if you're like getting on a boat and confronting the occupation that way. And did you receive any like backlash or like repression after putting the film out?
No, personally, I haven't received any retaliation or backlash, anything like that. What happened for me is what happened to a lot of the passengers on the ship, which was the fact that we were no longer allowed into Palestine by the Israeli authorities. So this is something that I don't show in the film because I was trying to focus in the film on the propaganda dimension. But after they took control of the ship, and they towed the ship to the port, they basically imprisoned all of us, all 700 plus activists who were on all of the vessels. And when we got there, they treated us like common criminals. You know, they were taking our fingerprints, our mugshots, demanding that we sign a piece of paper saying that we entered into Israel illegally, even though they kidnapped us in international waters and brought us there. So that's what happened with us. So the backlash or the retribution was that they said that we're not allowed to enter into Palestine for another 10 years. And sure enough, a number of the passengers who were on the ship, even those who had passports from Europe or elsewhere, they did try to enter Palestine after the flotilla, and they were not allowed in. Now, I did not try to go back to Palestine after the flotilla. I was planning to after 2020, but then, the coronavirus hit, COVID, and there were a lot of restrictions on travel at the time, and I couldn't go then. And then I was planning to go last year, and then something else happened. So I myself haven't gone or haven't attempted to go back to Palestine after the flotilla, but others have, at least within that 10-year time frame, and they were not allowed in. That was the biggest, let's say, thing that I had experienced or suffered personally, which was not being able to go back to the land of my ancestors, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I would say also them confiscating the footage too, you not even being able to show everything that actually went down too is just like a huge, I mean, it's kind of just like what Israel does, like rewrite history, decide what exactly happened. So it's great that what you did have was able to go out to counter that. Um, Also, thank you for answering all these questions. You're doing great. I know there's like a lot.
No,
So
I'm glad, and I want to thank everybody for being so proactive with this and wanting to ask questions and wanting to learn more. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
So somebody was asking, well, they said they forgot how many soldiers you all actually captured and like why did you release them back to the occupation? But it sounds like the occupation actually like it was vice versa. They kind of, took you guys. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's a great point actually, because we did capture 3 soldiers at the time. The passengers of the ship did capture 3 soldiers. And when they were captured, there was a lot of, let's say, chaos going on at the time, on the upper decks, essentially. And they were able to capture 3 soldiers. I was in a different part of the ship at the time. I was on the second highest deck, you could say. So the helicopter was above me. I could see the soldiers rappelling down on the ropes. And I was counting actually how many soldiers were coming down on those ropes at the time. And then the deck right above me is where all the shooting was taking place, or most of the shooting was taking place. I got shot later with a plastic bullet, but I was protected with the life vest that I was wearing. But most of it was happening on the deck above me. And so eventually the guys were able to capture 3 soldiers, and they were offered medical care. They were treated for their injuries at the time. They were in the inside of the ship. They were surrounded by all of our fellow passengers. And basically, we treated them humanely, as should be the case, or as you would expect people to do, to treat the captives humanely, whoever those captives may be. And so after they were treated for their wounds and injuries, and they were in the control of the passengers, the leadership of the ship and the leadership of the flotilla, they were faced with a choice on what to do with them. It was clear that the Israelis didn't care about how many people they killed of us, how many lives that they took of ours. And so after they were treated, the soldiers were handed back to their unit. But unfortunately, even when the soldiers were being handed back to their unit, the Israeli soldiers started firing at us, basically the people who were handing back the soldiers to them. And so some people say, well, why did you do this or why did you do that? I've received these types of questions frequently in film screenings that I did in the question and answer session after the film screening. And people need to understand that we were in a very difficult situation at the time. At the time of the attack, they were basically, attacking us with overwhelming force. And we had already lost many lives. There were dozens of people injured at the time. And so we were faced with a difficult set of circumstances, and we tried to make the best of those circumstances as we could. And so a decision was made to release the soldiers back to their unit. It was clear that the Israelis would keep on shooting and firing at us and killing no matter what, with impunity. So the leadership decided to hand back the soldiers to their unit. And unfortunately, even when they did hand them back to their unit, they were fired at. Or meaning we, the leadership and the people who physically handed back the soldiers to their units. So that's what happened in regards to the soldiers. Unfortunately, this is a point which is very important, which really tells both sides of the tale about what happened on that ship and who acted humanely and who did not. But mainstream media, of course, again, didn't cover this. And there was a documentary made by the BBC on the flotilla a couple of months after, or a few months rather, after it took place, after the attack took place. And in that documentary, this issue of handing back the soldiers and the way they were treated humanely and the way they were treated for their injuries, all of this was conveyed to the producers of this documentary done by the BBC. And they had actually promised that they would include this in their documentary when they released it. At the time that the documentary was released, none of this showed up. So one of the people who was with us on the ship, his name is Ken O'Keefe, he was the one who conveyed this information to the BBC correspondent who was doing the documentary. And she had promised him at the time that it will be included, but then in the end it wasn't. After the documentary was released, Ken released a secret tape that he recorded with that BBC correspondent when he told her about this, and in which she promised that it would be included. He had secretly recorded her, and he said, you know what, I'm sorry that I had to secretly record you, but because I know the way the BBC operates and the way mainstream media operates, I had to do this, which he did. And sure enough, you know, when they released the documentary, they didn't include this important information about the soldiers who were treated and then released.
Yeah, I feel like that was a good measure, because honestly, you can never trust that they'll actually, do right. I mean, we can only go off based on how they always report on things, which is just fully to serve the Zionist narrative. So that doesn't surprise me, honestly. But on that note, somebody was asking what sort of media coverage has like the documentary received? Were there any interviews by American or Western press, and any news coverage in other countries, maybe discrepancies in different countries on how it was reported?
The documentary itself, you mean?
Yeah, the documentary itself.
Yeah. Well, the documentary itself, I didn't have any interviews on any, American or mainstream media outlets, but it was covered in film festivals. It participated in about 28 or 29 film festivals, I can't remember. And it was covered primarily in the press, that covers film festivals mostly. It was covered a little bit in some European media platforms, Italian newspaper called Il Manifesto. I had a few radio interviews throughout my tours in France and Italy and so on. So in that sense, it was covered, the documentary, but it was primarily covered whenever we were doing screenings or we were participating in film festivals.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we have time for a few more questions. There was a lot, so I want to make sure we get a good mix of questions. So somebody asked, when the Israelis captured the ships, what did they do with them, and what did they do with the aid that you guys had on board?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And the reason that I couldn't mention everything in the flotilla is because, as I said, I wanted to focus on the propaganda dimension. But the original cut of the film, it was about a 90-minute cut. The final film is about 57 minutes. So there were a lot of things that I had to take out of the film, which address what happened with us after they took control of the ships. The Israelis, like I said, after they took control of the ships, they took control, I'd say maybe after about half an hour or so, they had full control of the ships and everybody on them. And the abuses continued throughout this time. So the beatings continued, the insults continued, the tying what do you call them? The not zip locks, but the
Zip
plastic
ties?
zip ties.
Mhm.
They had zip ties on us, all of the men basically. Either they had our hands zip tied either in front of us. Some of us had them behind our back. Some of us were blindfolded. Some were not. I was one of the people who had the zip ties behind their back, and I was blindfolded. They broke 3 of my ribs. Other people had other parts fractured, body parts fractured. So this continued throughout the whole time. Many people were prevented from going to the washroom. An elderly gentleman was forced to urinate on himself eventually because he was not allowed to go to the washroom for some reason. And these actions continued the whole time. And then the Human Rights Council issued a report. It did an investigation on what happened with us after they took control of the ships, the fact-finding mission from the UN Human Rights Council. And they even said that the maltreatment amounted to torture for some prisoners. And this is actually, it's all documented in the UNHRC, the UN Human Rights Council fact-finding mission report, which is still online, and you could access it through my website as well, truthlostat.com. Then they took us to the ports and to the port, and like I said, they treated us like common criminals and imprisoned everybody. And we were held incommunicado until the representatives of the various embassies came to see us in the prison. And at that point in time, we knew that the whole world had seen what had happened because we kept on broadcasting what was taking place with us during the attack on an alternative frequency that the Israelis weren't able to block. So that's the first part of the question. The second part, I'm sorry, you said what happened after the attack, and there was a second portion to the question as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It was what did they do with like the everything you guys had on board, like the cargo and
Oh, yeah. So, well, the footage and our personal belongings, they took all of that except for the footage that was broadcast or what we were able to smuggle out. Our belongings, personal belongings, they took all of that as well. And after they released our personal belongings a few months later, there were a lot of things that were missing or damaged and so on. And I went to pick up my bag in Turkey, and lo and behold, funny story. When I went to get my bag in Turkey, I had filmed 10 cassettes at the time. I was still filming on tapes at the time in 2010. Prior to the attack, I filmed with about 10 cassettes. I filled them up with footage. When I went to get my bag, I found 4 of those cassettes in there, and about 6 were missing. So I think that 4 of them just survived because they were in a different pocket that the Israelis didn't see. And this is how I was able to have exclusive footage on what took place prior to the attack in my film. So that's in regards to our personal belongings. As for the humanitarian assistance that we took with us, well, some of it never reached Gaza. And some of it did reach Gaza later on, but it was in a dilapidated state, you could say. And what do I mean by this? Well, there was one of the passengers who was with us on one of the other vessels. I think he was an Italian journalist. He did a short documentary on the flotilla as well. And in his documentary, he showed what happened to some of the wheelchairs, for example, that we had with us, that we were taking to Gaza. When the Israelis released those wheelchairs finally to go to Gaza, they were broken beyond repair. Most of the wheelchairs were broken beyond repair. So, okay, yeah, they released them in the end, but you know, what use of it is there if you're going to break them up and then send them to Gaza? So this is what happened. Some of the assistance reached, some of them did, some of it didn't, and some of it reached in a bad state, let's say. But I want to raise an important point here, is that a lot of people mistakenly think that the idea behind the flotilla was just to take humanitarian aid to Gaza or humanitarian assistance to Gaza. That wasn't our goal. Our primary goal, which we said then and we say now, was to break the blockade, because the issue isn't an issue of humanitarian assistance. This is a human rights issue. So the people in Gaza, they have the same right to freedom, the right to live, the right to trade with the outside world, the right to freedom of movement, to go back and forth wherever they want, as any other people in the world do. And this is what we're trying to do. We were trying to break the blockade to uphold this right to life that they have, this right to life as normal human beings, as all other human beings in the world have. So it wasn't a matter of charity. This is not a matter of charity. It never was and never will be. The Palestinians don't want to live on endless charity for the rest of their lives. They want to have the right to live just as all other people in the world live. So the idea was to break the blockade first and foremost. Yes, we did take with us humanitarian assistance, but that was, you could say, a secondary goal or a byproduct of what we were doing. The main goal was to break the blockade. And it's important for people to keep this in mind, because people sometimes think that it's just about providing humanitarian assistance or providing aid or providing charity. And that's not what the crux of the matter is.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Rifat. And I think that is a great point for us to end off on, a great thing for everybody to remember and to carry with them when thinking about the Freedom Flotilla. Thank you guys so much for all the questions. I think that was such a great variety of questions. And thank you, Rifat, for answering all of them. I know there was a lot, so yeah, that was really great. Thank you so much for being here. I think that we just have like 5 more minutes. I want to go over some campaigns that we have going on right now. With a lot of people are asking, what can we do? What can we do? Well, there's a lot we could do, which is great. So just as the Gaza Freedom Flotilla was sort of this like people's effort to break the siege on Gaza, I think that we do need to be working in that realm of like people's campaigns. And one of a great way that we can do that is through a people's arms embargo campaign, which we just joined the Mask Off Maersk campaign in partnership with Palestinian Youth Movement. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Maersk, they are a logistics giant, so a shipping corporation. They ship all types of cargo internationally. And, one of their most profitable shipments are to Israel to ship military cargo to ensure that Israel has all the materials it needs to, continue to commit genocide on Gaza. So we have a few actions that you can take. There will be links in the chat. The first thing you can do is send a letter to the Maersk CEOs and executives. And then we also have a petition that you can sign, as well as some opportunities to phone bank. So, we're not just like sending these letters to Maersk, we're calling their phone lines and making sure they understand that they're gonna have to keep hearing from us at the very least that we demand that they cut ties with genocide. So on that page, if you send the letter to the CEO, you'll get the call script for you to be able to call Maersk whenever you want to, whenever you have the time, and as often as you can. But if you're available to sign up for one of the phone banking shifts, which once you attend the first one, can seriously take like 5 to 10 minutes. It can be super quick. But it's really important for us to jam Maersk's phone lines together. So that's the goal of the phone banks. So yeah, there's a lot more information on the website. Feel free to read up on that. But I really believe in this campaign because it's a people's arms embargo campaign. And like I mentioned earlier, our government completely failed, like looked us in the eyes, asking over and over again for an arms embargo campaign. And what did Biden just do? Notify Congress of another $8 billion weapon sale to Israel. So we really need to take matters into our own hands, just as they did with the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. And then the next thing I want to fill you guys in on is our campaign to help free Dr. Abu Safia. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who was the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, who was kidnapped by the Israeli military along with hundreds of other medical staff and is now in Israeli detention. He was first in one detention center. Now he's in the Ofrin torture prison, and a doctor was actually tortured to death earlier in April. So that's where he is right now. His detention was just extended to, let me get the exact date for you guys, February 13th. And he's actually banned from meeting with his lawyers until January 22nd. And it's also been reported that he's in critical condition. So, I mean, what can this be described as other than genocide? A blatant attack on hospital and medical staff. But we have a lot of actions you guys can take around that. You can sign a petition to Dr. Rand in the State Department, which we'll be delivering to her. We have over 5,000 signatures. We're trying to get to 10,000. And we also have an action toolkit with not just that petition, but a bunch of other stuff you can do on your own or with a couple people to raise awareness on this issue. One of those being sending a message to your doctor. I mean, we really like the silence from healthcare institutions is honestly insane. And we need to put the pressure there as well to say, hey, like, is this not your entire career? Like, maybe say something about it. So look in that toolkit. There's a lot there. And then the last thing I know it's 8 o'clock, but just real quick, just one more thing. Unilever, which is Ben& Jerry's parent company, has been suppressing them from calling for a ceasefire. They actually said that they will dismantle the board and sue the individual members of Ben& Jerry's if they called for a ceasefire, which is insane, right? Over a year of genocide, and we can't even say the word ceasefire. That's abhorrent, right? So I think that this is a great time for us to use our power as consumers to show these corporations that actually, as consumers, we do want these corporations to say something about the genocide and to actually take a principled stand. So you can also send a letter to Ben& Jerry's COs. There's more information there on the website. I would go over it all, but I just want to respect everybody's time tonight. We have another webinar tomorrow on defunding the Pentagon. We're going to talk about what it means to invest in people and the planet. That's going to be with our co-director, Danica, and she's going to have a conversation with Chris Smalls and Stephen Donziger. So that's tomorrow at 8 p.m. ET, same time as this call. So yeah, and then just join us the next Missing Piece next month, February 10th. At this time. So I'll see you guys then. Thank you so much for listening to all that and for being here today. Thank you again, Rifat. I want to reiterate, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'll let you go so you can get some sleep. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you everybody for being on tonight. And
Thank you.
we'll see you next month. Yeah, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.